Hello and welcome to this episode of Compensation Insider. Today, I'd like to talk about dealing with executives and the role that compensation and benefits can play in recruitment. So many years ago, when I first moved to the UAE, I was working for Majid Al Futtaim, which is a conglomerate and which deals in many different types of industries. Retail, it has the Carrefour brand across the region. Real estate, building malls, mixed-use development areas, with hotels and villas, apartments, offices, and so on. Fashion, different forms of retail services, financial services, and so on. So typical GCC conglomerate. And the very good thing about Majid Al Futtaim, which it still has, was that it was handled from a governance point of view. So we're talking about the board in a very professional manner, where the board meetings were always done properly. The board members were independent, non-executive directors, mixed with people who were recommended by the family, but there was a high level of professionalization and so on. And when I first joined the organization way back in 2007, the UAE was booming, literally. I mean, it was this huge expansion phase. There was a lot of real estate and construction going on. At the time, there were 20% of the world's cranes were located in Dubai. Such was the expansion, the physical expansion of the city itself. And it was, for me, coming from, I always say, coming from the old continent, where when we had 2.5 or 3%, growth of the GDP in a year, everybody was like, wow, super. And I arrived in the UAE, and it was an explosion. It was like 12% a year or something. There was intense war for talent, especially in the construction and real estate industry. And we were expanding, we were going into new countries, opening new malls, new mixed-use development, and so on. So we were recruiting a lot of very senior executives, either at the corporate level or within the operating companies. And in the beginning, I was asked to participate somewhat in the recruitment process, just by, they understood, the senior leadership understood that if I needed to prepare a proposal for, a package for a candidate, I needed to know what they were making. And because most of those candidates that we were recruiting from all over the world were already executives in their old organizations. They were on executive packages with stock options, deferred pay, clawbacks, all sorts of things. And so they understood that I needed to speak to them to really understand what they were having today, so that I could prepare a package that would be competitive to make them hopefully agree to join us. So they started to ask me to just join, and ask for 15 minutes for 15 minutes with the candidates, and ask them for their package information, and just ask questions to check if what they were claiming they were getting made sense or not, and then that I would prepare the package and the employment contract for those people. And this was not something that I could delegate to anybody on my team. That had to be done by me, because they wanted those very senior people to be, talking to another. I was an executive myself, although on the junior level of executive, I was vice president. So that would also be good for the candidates to be speaking with me. What happened is that over a period of time, by talking to those people that we were interviewing, once the company thought, oh, we might want to prepare a package, let's ask Sandrine to talk about his current pay. I was able to identify a few issues that I could anticipate. And I was able to help the organization. I remember there was one time a French candidate, and I was like, you know what, I think this gentleman is not going to accept the package. The way that he's talking, he's not sure that he wants to relocate to Dubai. He was in the US somewhere, LA or something. And I'm not sure that he's going to accept the package, even if we make it a good package. And eventually, for example, that gentleman actually said no, and for the reasons I told my manager about. So after a while, what happened, this happened 2 or 3 times. For example, we had this Swedish lady who was absolutely fantastic. We wanted her to become one of our CEOs of one of the operating companies. And while discussing with her, I was able to ask, so there are a number of questions that we can ask in the UAE that might not necessarily be always well accepted in other parts of the world, but we need to know from a visa and a sponsoring point of view. So this lady was a single mother, and her daughter was 12 years old. And when I found out that she was a single mother, I had to ask more questions about her personal status. So I said, I'm sorry, may I ask, are you divorced or widow? Or she said, no, I'm just a single mother. And I said, okay, I'm sorry, I still need to ask because it has implications in terms of visa application. Has the father recognized your child? And she said, no, I've had the child by myself. So there's no father name. And I said, okay, I need to check with my team. And I had a PRO on my team, so a public relations officer, and it's somebody whose role is to be the kind of liaison to the government to, get the visas that we asked for and all the paperwork and so on. And I talked to my PRO and I said, what happens if a lady has a child who doesn't have the father name on the birth certificate? Can she sponsor her child to come live with her in the UAE? And it turns out, I don't know if it's still the case, but at the time in 2007, that it was not possible. It would have been possible if she had been divorced or widower, but the fact that the child didn't have a father name, she was technically considered as I don't know how what would be a nice name, but in the French we would have called it bâtard in the old times. So like almost an illegal child, even though that was perfectly legal in Sweden. And as such, the lady would not be able to sponsor her child to come live with her. So I came back to my boss and I told him about that. And I said, well, we have to be careful because I think that this lady might not be able to sponsor her daughter to come. And that would probably be a no-go for her. Turns out that I was right. She said, no, I cannot leave my daughter. She's 12 years old. I don't want to leave her in a boarding school back in Sweden while I'm working in Dubai. I'd love to take the job, but I have to pass. So eventually, after anticipating a few of those situations like that, I became fully involved in the recruitment process to the point where I would actually interview the candidates. So not just talk to them about package, but to be part of the full recruitment cycle. And where actually the company was trying to put me among the first people to interview the candidate, so that if they later on decided that they wanted to put together a package, I would have enough time to put together the package. Because you have to realize that in those days, we would fly somebody out from Europe, okay, or the US, and they would spend a day in interviews, meeting with the group CEO, the CFO, the head of HR, myself, other senior executives, depending on which part of the organization they would be. Then they would be in a meeting room waiting. The management would take a decision whether they thought they would like to make an offer for that candidate or not. And I would have to prepare the package. And if presented to top management, and if they said yes, before that person left the office on that same day, I would personally give them the offer letter printed out and signed by the head of HR or by the group CEO, depending on the position, and tell them, we're so happy, blah, 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 here's your contract. Look at it on the flight back home and let us know the offer is valid for so many weeks, blah, blah. So because I needed more time in order to be able to build those packages, because they were quite complex, everybody was at different stages of their executive, stock options and all this kind of stuff. And I had to try and figure, conversion rates and income taxes and, making sure that our long-term incentive plan was explained in a way that they would understand it and value it, because it was a very generous plan at the time. So they understood that I needed to be one of the first people who would work on that package, because no matter what the management was deciding, I was starting to build a package as soon as I had spoken to that person, so that in case they decided to recruit him or her, I would be ready before the end of the day, so before the person left. So it's just to show that even in Comp and Ben, you can be involved in recruitment in a very practical manner for top management, and have those interactions and negotiate complex packages and so on, rather than having it done by somebody in the recruitment team. Most of the time, the only two HR people who would meet those candidates were the HR director, the EVP of HR, and myself. And it was very stressful, but at the same time exhilarating and so on. So I just wanted to show you that depending on the company, depending on the circumstances, depending on the culture of the organization and the needs of the organization, you might get involved as a Comp and Ben person into things that you might not do in any other location. I've never done that anywhere else, not in that way, at least. That was the only place where I did that, but that was a big part of my job at the time, because there was so much pressure for talent and so on, that that was really going to impact the future of the organization. So that was part of the job. So I just want to say that we might have like standard job descriptions and things that we're supposed to do, but you will always end up in some organization doing something which you had never anticipated to do, which will be unique to that company and which will give you this kind of perspective that you would not have gotten if you had worked somewhere else. And that's also one of the things that are nice, but you need to be prepared for it, because sometimes the questions that will come to you might be very surprising, but hey, that's the beauty of being in Comp and Ben. So I hope you like the story, and I will see you next week in the next episode of Compensation Insider. Thank you very much.